Well, coming up on today's show, the Tesla Model 3 finally debuts down under. Why the Hyundai IONIQ could be getting an N Performance version, and why some London streets could ban non-electric cars. Well, good morning, good afternoon and good evening, wherever you are in the world. Hello and welcome to the Thursday, the 23rd of August edition of EV News Daily. It's Martyn Lee here with the news you need to know about electric cars and the move towards sustainable transport. Thank you to myev.com for helping make this show. They've built the first marketplace specifically for electric vehicles. It's a totally free marketplace, and it simplifies the buying and selling process and helps you learn about EVs along the way too. Thank you for bearing with me over the last couple of days. A bit under the weather and a head cold. I would say nasty head cold. No, I would say man flu. The voice is still sounding awful. Actually, now it sounds like I'm a teenage boy and my voice is breaking in middle school. In myself, I feel so much better. Thank you for all the kind wishes, the kind words that people sent over the last couple of days. People saying, take a break. Look, I've made 220 of these without missing a single show. 220 daily podcasts. I'm kind of in the groove. I'd rather not miss a day just because of a cold. But thank you so much for everyone that said, look, we don't mind if you're ill. You cannot do one. Well, I've written a lot to do today. So if you can bear with the voice, and if my voice holds up 20 minutes... Well, let's see how far we get on today's podcast. Let's kick off with some news in brief. A ton of stuff going on that doesn't quite merit a whole story written about it and comment, but some good headlines, some positive headlines, some reasons to be cheerful and optimistic. Firstly, kicking off with the government in India. Now, the Indian government are planning to subsidize EV charging stations in order to speed up the EV revolution there. The government have described it as the old chicken and egg metaphor. It's well worn, but we know what they mean by that. Which comes first, the chargers or the cars? Well, the Indian government are saying, we'll pay for the chargers, they'll be ready for the cars. OPEL/Vauxhall, depending on where you live in the world, has followed up their teaser image recently of a new EV with a full-on concept picture. The GTX experimental concept. Well, it's a mouthful. And talk about hedging their bets. Not only an experiment, but the experimental concept is a compact SUV with coupe appeal. On the powertrain side, it's going to be an EV, pure electric. It's going to have inductive charging and a 50 kilowatt hour battery. Except it doesn't, does it? Because they haven't even built a concept. All they've done is released a picture. Someone at Opel got a subscription to Photoshop and had a little play around. Come on, Opel/Vauxhall. You can do better than that. You've got some incredibly talented engineers and designers working in your company. You can release an EV sooner than just simply putting out a picture of a ridiculous concept. I mean, look, it's nice and all that, but it's a picture. Come on, you can do better. We love you. We want to see cars coming out of your factories. And the average sale price of the Tesla Model 3 now stands at $59,000 ASP. And if you're thinking, hang on, I follow Tesla pretty closely, they've never released their average selling prices. They still haven't. This is a crowdsourcing campaign. 4,600 Tesla Model 3 owners, and we have to trust them that they are Model 3 owners, have put into a database what they paid and how they configured, and the average price coming out after 4,500 of them is $59,000. That price has been going up recently, but there's good reason for that, as you know. It's the all-wheel drive and the Performance Plus, however you would want to quite indicate having the performance upgrade to the Performance. It means more options have been available, and that's why the average selling price has actually been increasing, and I think it will continue to do so until Q1 next year, when they're finally going to make the $35,000 one. They get to enough scale, and then you'll see that price start to come down. It'll never get to $35,000, obviously, but even then you're going to want a different colour paint. So if you end up paying $35,000 for a Model 3, you really have gone pure base spec. Right, let me take a sip of the honey and lemon. Honestly, the 20-year-old will be looking at the 40-year-old me thinking, honey and lemon, you've changed. That's better. Okay, let's get into the main stories today then. Well, Tesla has flown 3 production versions of the Model 3 around the world to let Australian fans have a look around it. And boy, did those Aussie fans ever. Some people queued for hours just to get a few minutes with the Model 3 at showrooms in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. Now, Australian customers, like all those who put their deposit down over 2 years ago, still have to wait another year before driving their own cars. The best guesstimate for local deliveries in Australia is production starting within the next 12 months and then deliveries 12 to 18 months. Here in the UK, we don't expect the right-hand drive model to appear at the earliest before July. If it's before next summer, 2019, right-hand drive versions, I will be amazed, but very happy. I gather the model on display down under in Australia is the cheapest one that they're currently making, so long range but rear wheel drive only. That is 66,000 Aussie dollars in local currency, add taxes and import duties, and you're looking at 80,000 drive away Australian dollars. Now look, the queues don't surprise me. There is pent up demand to see one in the flesh, or I should say in the metal, with my first viewing of it being earlier this year at the Goodwood Festival of Speed. I can tell you, the only way to get a true sense of what kind of car the Model 3 is to get up close with it. It's such a different experience. Now, obviously, I'd studied thousands of photos as not just a Tesla fan, but an EV fan. But then when I finally saw the Model 3, there were bits that I'd never realised in my brain that made more sense. I always thought the one big screen was a compromise. And and the time that I spent in it wasn't the slightest bit of compromise. It was intuitive. And this was a left-hand drive version as well, because it was an American version that had been shipped to the UK. Even then, even with my brain sitting on the wrong side, air quotes, wrong, right if you're in North America, but even on the wrong side for my brain, it still felt like, okay, so all I have to do is glance down and there's my speed, and I glance down, there's the sat-nav, and it made a lot of sense to my brain anyway. If you haven't seen one, and you're even interested, go and have a look, and they make a lot of sense. I wish that more manufacturers of EVs would at least try and get a few of them in showrooms. I know they can make, they're selling things like the Kona and a world of difference. I wish more would do that. Well, I've mentioned the Kona, let's talk about it now. I was going to leave this one till a little bit later, but the Hyundai Kona EV has a long range, we know that, but actually there's a certain stat which I saw today in a headline. I thought, oh yeah, I should have mentioned that. Well, recently on the show we were talking about the newly official EPA rating of the Hyundai Kona EV, or at least the 64 kilowatt hour version of the battery, which is the only one being sold in North America. I even mentioned that it was more than the Chevrolet Bolt, but I didn't connect the dots to make this statement. The Kona EV is the longest range of any EV on sale that isn't built by Tesla. Let me say it again. The Kona EV is the longest range electric vehicle currently on sale, well, it will be in America very soon, that isn't built by Tesla. So the Kona pack stores 4 kilowatt hours of energy more than the Chevrolet Bolt, so that's why it tops it out. And we've seen with the IONIQ, Hyundai are getting a reputation, actually, for building very efficient EVs. In terms of charging the Kona, I want to say again, Hyundai have this really confusing way on their website, on the descriptions, in their press releases, of using this phrase, when connected to a 100 kilowatt charger. They'll say that it will get a charge time, 0 to 80%, of 54 minutes, which is wonderful, when connected to a 100 kilowatt charger. The problem is, every EV website and blog seems to have run away with that and said, oh, it's 100 kilowatt charge speeds. It's not on the Kona. Please remember that the maximum current that the battery can take in the Kona is 200 amps. The maximum current you can get through the current CCS plug anyway, before the next standard is more common. The current CCS plug can only handle 200 amps as a max. And then given the voltage of the pack in the Kona, the theoretical maximum charge speed is around 72 kilowatts. It's 71 point something. Early YouTube videos have it topping out, starting at a 10% state of charge, like the Bjorn Nyland one that he did, start at and so give it the full beans on a 150 kilowatt charger, and I think he got about 70 point something kilowatt charge speed, which is brilliant. I'm not criticising. It's amazing charge speed, and it'll be very useful to do those super quick charging when you're on road trips, and you've got to use a level 3 charger, but it's not the 100 which you will see written it kind of in most places. So when you see that, remember, they've just misunderstood, easily, by the way, but they've misunderstood what Hyundai mean. They say this phrase only when connected to a 100 kilowatt charger. It doesn't mean it will charge that fast. It'll do 75 minutes up to 80%, 75 minutes on a 50 kilowatt charger, about 9.5 hours overnight on the 7.2 kilowatt onboard charger. Oh, and as I've mentioned, the Hyundai, I don't know how to say it where you listen around the world. I'll just mash it up every time. The Hyundai IONIQ, super efficient car, very small battery, but does tons of miles. They're planning to deliver an electric N performance model. Now, they are starting to really push their N performance, even with their combustion cars as well. The current crop of N cars are selling very well. The performance range and the Hyundai IONIQ EV-N is in the frame. According to carsuk.net, Hyundai's N-boss, the guy who looks after their performance division, Albert Bierman, has been speaking to Automotive News, and he says that the N brand won't be able to avoid electrification past 2021. So within a couple of years, you get some very fast, souped-up electric versions of Hyundais. And he seems to have a clear idea of what could be done. He said, as an example, we have an IONIQ EV where, were we to find a bigger battery, a bigger motor and inverter, we could make an IONIQ EV-N with a nice chassis and more power. Something like that is not fully crazy. End quote. I'll put a link to that Cars UK article in the show notes. Right, how are we doing? We're 10 minutes in, and I'm just about retaining my voice. If we get to 20, it'll be a miracle. Let's move on to Ford, and Ford will continue to take a cautious approach to EVs in Australia, despite their new local boss. Her name is Kay Hart. She's been promoted from to the president post directly from Ford's basically Team Edison division, which is all about their new mobility solutions across the globe. So she came from an electrified background. According to drive.com.au, speaking to Australian media for the first time this week at the launch of the new 2019 Everest SUV, Kay Hart told Drive that there are no plans to fast forward the company's future electric vehicle plans and will wait for the local market to mature and build confidence in battery-powered cars. Well, the EV market is definitely behind other countries in Australia, not for the want of certain early adopters. Certain EV drivers in Australia that listen to this podcast, I know, would love there to be more government support, more manufacturer support, and I'm worried for Ford because although they're doing what is right commercially, long-term, I think it'll be good for them to have one or two really sexy kind of halo EVs out there in the market just for their long-term future. I want Ford to be a big player in EVs, but there is no doubt that there is going to be some car companies that win and car companies that suffer on like a 5 to 10 year macro on this. And so I'm not saying in the short term Ford are in any danger. They know infinitely more about cars than I ever will. They've got some incredibly smart people working there. An idiot on a podcast doesn't need to tell them how to do their job. But I'm kind of worried because I love fast Fords. I grew up, when you think about it, I was a teenager in the early 1990s. I had those posters on my wall of Cosworths and RSs, and I love fast Fords. And I would love Ford to be doing something with EVs, more than the odd compliance car and statements about holding station. How many kids are growing up now going, you know what, when I grow up, I want a Ford. Yeah, none. They all want Teslas. And you can't have just one big winner in the EV space. We're going to need more than that. I'd love them to see us put a small team just to make some really one or two sexy halo cars that even they made like 100 of them that we could get really super involved and fall in love with Ford's EV plan. For now, though, ain't happening. Let's move on to, I've mentioned Tesla, and we do love comparing cars on the drag strips. It's not useful in any way whatsoever, but it makes for a nice YouTube video, and that's what Top Gear have done with a Tesla Model S, the 75D, and the brand new Jaguar I-Pace. Well, many people compare the Model X to the I-Pace, as it's the SUV style, but in terms of pricing, well, the Model S and the I-Pace are released in the same bracket, 68k or £68,000 versus £64,000 respectively. Well, the I-Pace is lighter, which gives it an advantage, and of course the Model S75 is the baby of the Tesla range. The video shows the Tesla off the line first, but then as the race goes on, the I-Pace just about pips it just before the finish line, and it overtakes it. Is that a fair fight or not? I'll let you decide. I'll put a link to that YouTube video in the show notes. 4 more stories to go. Thank you so much to everyone who supports this show on Patreon. You can check out more details, patreon.com/evnewsdaily, if you'd like to have a look at the page. Well, Siemens has partnered with electric vehicle charging solutions provider Ubitricity. Yeah, the lamppost people, to transform hundreds of London street lamps into on-street chargers. The company was one of 8 to win a place on a citywide framework contract hosted by Transport for London, TfL, and the Greater London Authority and London Councils, according to David Pratt for Current website. He says drivers connect to it using a cable fitted with a meter. So the meter is halfway along the cable. So one end, plug into your EV, halfway along the cable is the meter. Other end, plug into the lamppost. It identifies what charging point it is, does a bit of a handshake with it, and then it turns on the power. The data is sent digitally to a mobile power supplier who bill you for the electricity that you've used, while those using a standard cable are authorised through a mobile site. I'll put a link to the article in the show notes. I'm talking of London, by the way. A lot of talk today about this next story and a lot of criticism online, and I'll tell you why I think maybe I see it from a slightly different angle, or maybe you think I'm bonkers, let me know. Non-electric vehicles could be banned from a new low-emission, you think I'm going to say zone? I'm not. Low-emission street in the City of London, in a pilot project aimed at cutting air pollution. Well, London's financial centre is home to a number of nitrogen dioxide pollution hotspots, which are exacerbated by the area's tall buildings and narrow streets, according to Auto Express. To combat this, the City of London's air quality manager, Ruth Calderwood, said the council may introduce an ultra-low emission vehicle street, where only EVs and plug-in hybrids would be allowed. Now, I saw a ton of criticism online today saying this will make no difference. Even if it does lower the pollution in one street, it'll be the same. People just use other roads. The same cars will travel, but it'll make the other roads worse. And actually, London's pollution is so horrifically off the scale, I can't even tell you, that it might not even lower the emission sensors, the pollution sensors on that street because there's so much of it around. But let me tell you why I think this is a good thing. It opens the door. It just nudges the door a little bit. Let me tell you about the 2 kittens that we got recently. They will sit next to a closed door if they know the food is the other side. If I push that door just a little bit so they can just see through to the kitchen where their food bowls are, they'll push at the door and fight their way in. And then I've got 2 very happy little black kittens eating their lunch, right? And this, just banning combustion cars from one street, is just pushing that door just a little bit. If you ban combustion cars from swathes of London, there'll be outrage. You ban it from one street as a trial, and it works okay. Then next month, there'll be 3 or 4 streets, and then we'll start next year with a tiny zone, if you like. I think it's a good thing because it just eases people in. It doesn't create too many massive headlines to say cars are being banned and diesel drivers who were sold the diesel myth all those years ago with no tax, like the government did in this country, they're being bullied and all that kind of stuff. I think this is a good way of doing it, by the way. Maybe I'm wrong. Well, moving on to our final story today. We got there. Yes! The US National Renewable Energy Laboratory, the NREL, is testing a novel technology that could prevent electric vehicle charging from crashing the power grid. The technology from Californian startup PowerFlex Systems is aimed at building owners, those who run those big complexes, looking to provide EV charging points, for example, like parking lots. Now, this is a report coming from Jason Dane at Green Tech Media, and he says when drivers hook up their cars to a PowerFlex charger, they can use a mobile app, and it tells the system which charging point they're using. Then it tells them what kind of EV they have, when they are going to come back to their car. You can set it to say, I'm coming back to the car at the end of the day. Say 5 o'clock, I finish work. And you can tell it on the app how many miles you need your car to do for your journey home. That information is all compiled, and this is the power of using that big data. And the system will work out how much power to send to each vehicle, when to send it, and it keeps an overall energy draw within reasonable limits. Such load management, as it's called, load management techniques already being investigated elsewhere, and can help ensure that simultaneous, wide-scale EV charging doesn't bring the grid down. I'll put a full link to that Green Tech Media article in the show notes. We made it to the end. My voice didn't break like a teenage boy. We did a couple of times, but we'll gloss over that. Thank you for bearing with me. Keep your comments coming in for this week's question of the week. How much range is enough range? Do you really need all of the range of most modern EVs? I've got a ton of comments to get to later in the week, by the way, and some fantastic insights I want to share with you from our listeners. And hi to Mark. Mark Buckingham listens in New Zealand. And the thing is, in New Zealand, they got some cold bits, and lots of EV makers like to test their cars in the cold. And he's seen a few, and he's been sending me some pictures, and I'll update you on tomorrow's show or later in the week when I work out, because they're all covered in camouflage, I'll work out what they are, because a couple of them that look very Chinese, two-seater city car that I don't recognise. They're not a Geely, they're not any of the new little two-seaters that I've seen. The concepts, this one's got a very distinctive boot, but I'll do some investigation tomorrow, and I'll let you know what pictures Mark has been sending me of these camouflaged cars doing some cold weather testing in New Zealand. I mentioned Patreon. I want to say a heartfelt thank you to the 63 patrons of this programme, whose generosity means you get to hear this show, I get to make it, and it hopefully, fingers crossed, we entertain and maybe inform people around the world. Thousands of listeners every day now to this show, which still blows my mind a little bit, and it blows my mind 63 people will contribute financially to making this show. If that is you, thank you. And if it's ever crossed your mind to check out the page, it is patreon.com/EVNewsDaily. Something that you might want to have a look at or not. Honestly, I don't mind. There's 219 previous episodes of the show where I do sound normal, I promise, on those ones. You can get them on iTunes and Google Play, Spotify and YouTube, TuneIn, Stitcher, and the blog at evnewsdaily.com. And if you want to catch up on our reviews, you can do that, read what other people are writing, and maybe even leave your own star rating and a few words. Come and say hi on the socials, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Search EV News Daily. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you tomorrow.